it seems investors have been, or markets have been, rather unforgiving, given the earnings reports that have come through so far. Like, what do you make of the dynamics?
Fundamentally, big tech this week, it was really, I'd say, an A- in terms of
good
the
earnings.
Actual fundamentals. The stocks reacted C+. And I think that's more Fed 10-year driven. You look at the underlying growth, I think this is something that's actually strengthening into year-end, into next year. We viewed it as an opportunity to pound the table on names that we love. I think the Alphabet sell-off was just a massive head-scratcher. You look at the strength from Redmond in terms of what Nadella is doing with Microsoft. AI monetization now starting to happen. Meta strong. Amazon, that was a trophy case quarter. And I think next week, in terms of we're going to continue to see more and more tech earnings. In my opinion, Apple, despite all the bears, I think this is going to be just another strength for that period. And I think that's probably the most important earnings throughout all of our earnings season.
I mean, they're facing a slump in smartphone sales. We just had Foxconn, their main suppliers, under investigation. There's a lot of still headwinds involving the stock itself. I'm just wondering, overall, what do you expect in terms of the earnings then?
Yeah, I think that's bark worse than bite right now. I mean, to me, from a demand perspective, iPhone 15 is still 8 to 10% above iPhone 14. We haven't seen, even across Asia, in terms of all of our checks, any cuts in terms of iPhone demand. That's important. And
even
I think
with this Huawei phone?
Look, Huawei phone, if you want what's the equivalent of an iPhone 13, then go out and get a Huawei. But you're talking about right now the iPhone 15, that's premier in terms of what the Chinese consumer wants. And that's why what we've seen is any sort of the shadow ban or worries, it's been minimal in terms of what we've seen. And I'm not saying that there's not going to be headwinds for Cupertino in China, but we've been there before. And you're talking about something where demand and production continue to be very strong, services is ramping, and I think Apple, we sit here 3-6 months from now, it's making new all-time highs rather than the bears that have been calling for its demise the last 10 years.
Okay, well, let's have a look at AI, because that's been the absolute buzzword, and anybody who says AI anytime sees their stock go up. Now, tell me something. I mean, is it a case of, Roy Amara came up with this idea that, this law, if you will, that we tend to overestimate the impact of technologies in the short term while underestimating them in the long term. Where do you think AI fits in that?
In my opinion, in covering tech since the 90s, I think it's a 1995 moment. I think it's the biggest technology trend
doesn't it? Yeah.
that we've seen since the internet. And I think ultimately what we're seeing here, it started with NVIDIA, Jensen, the godfather of AI. And now ultimately, if you look at Microsoft this past week, I mean, monetization's starting to happen in AI. They're talking about $1 trillion of incremental spend coming to tech, which is why the way I view this all is that macro, I get it that that's going to take the narrative in the near term. But if you look, this is the biggest transformational tech trend, which is why I believe we're in the early stages of the next tech bull market, and I think that's going to send the bears back into their caves hibernation mode.
What's your you're in the region now, you were here a couple of months ago. What's your sense of how demand for U.S. tech has changed among Asian investors? Because it's also this sort of tussle between, do you buy Chinese big tech, for example, or do you buy U.S. big tech? I mean, not that you can't do both, but I'm just wondering where the mindset is really of Asian investors.
I think it's been a massive shift that I've seen the last few years, especially even over the last 6 months, in terms of you're selling China tech, you're buying U.S. tech. I think that's really been the narrative across the region from an institutional perspective, because that's where the growth is. And if you look, you could talk about Magnificent Seven. I think it's just going to spread to mid-cap and the rest of software and chips. This is a golden age for AI. Now, I do believe Chinese tech is undervalued, in my opinion. I think some of the regulatory risk probably in the rearview mirror. But right now, I view it as a table pounder name to own U.S. tech. Despite, remember, a lot of the economists, they've called 10 of the last 2 downturns the last 20 years. This is just another one.
Why do you think Chinese tech is underrated? What are you seeing here in the region that maybe there's more opportunities there than what
I think it's really it's about technology. In other words, the AI, even though there's a bit of a decoupling that's happening, it's being undervalued. What that's going to be able to monetize when you look at Tencent, Baidu, JD, and others. So that's why I get some of the regulatory risk. And right now, the Uber driver here in Hong Kong was bearish on Chinese tech. So I get right now, it's easy to be like that. Yeah. But I do believe when you look at the revolution that's happened in terms of AI, it's going to benefit the Chinese players as well as U.S. tech. And what I view as $1 trillion, hitting the waves of tech.
Dan, just quickly here. Okay, let's take AI. Let's take a look at Meta and the metaverse. Okay, it's kind of like being pushed to one side, but surely the best positioned company out of the lot would be the one which can marry AI with that meta technology, as it were, and with the deal that, of course, Microsoft looks like it's getting with Activision Blizzard, married with their ChatGPT AI functionality, surely puts them in the driving seat.
Look, Nadella right now has a glass of champagne with feet up on the table. In terms
shoes
of
on or shoes off?
Shoes off. Okay. Maybe slippers on. Just because you look at AI, it's Microsoft's world, everyone else paying rent. In terms of from an AI perspective, they're owning on the enterprise. The consumer piece, obviously another black eye for FTC and Khan losing that. And it just shows they're going to get stronger and stronger. And monetization, I think this is really going to be a new Microsoft that plays out. Despite many, you talk about valuation. Valuation, $3 gets your cup of coffee. You look at ultimately playing out this trend. I think it's tech. I think it's Microsoft. I think it's Google. And, of course, some of the pure play names like Palantir and some
Should we be
others.
worried that Apple's a bit behind on the AI?
I think that's perception more than reality. Okay. I do believe they're going to aggressively spend this AI arms race. Monetization's key in that golden install base in Cupertino.